We are on the play here, and well, unfortunately, quick mulligan, but let's see. Our 6 is fine. We don't have a white source, but we do get a scry. Our opponent has kept their 7, and Swift Spear, I think we just want to keep that on top. It's a nice follow-up to have Swift Spear plus another spell for our second turn, but for right now we're just going to kick things off with this Goblin Guide, and so hopefully we'll just get our attacks going before our opponent can really set up and just get too much damage dealt to our opponent. We see Celestial Colonnade revealed off the Goblin Guide, so it's very possible our opponent is playing some sort of control deck, and the Colonnade is just going to enter the battlefield here, so our opponent's going to have to discard because they do have 8 cards, so we'll see what the discard is, and that may give us more of a clue in terms of what we're up against. The most likely deck here is the Jeskai Nahiri deck that's pretty popular. So our plan is working out nicely. We're just going to go ahead and play the Swift Spear, cast a Lava Spike here, and that's going to put our opponent down to 15, plus the attacks will put our opponent all the way down to 11. And we're hoping that our opponent doesn't have something like a Lightning Helix to be able to gain some life. We see Cryptic Command being revealed off the Goblin Guide. We should be able to play around Cryptic Command somewhat if the game even gets to that point. Our opponent is going to need to have some sort of removal here, most likely. So we'll see if that is the case. Though this Polluted Delta looks like it's going to be a full shock. So it could be a Lightning Helix, which would be the best thing our opponent could play right now. It could also be 2 removal spells, something like a Path to Exile plus a Lightning Bolt, but it is Lightning Helix, and so that was the best card our opponent could have in this situation. And we still don't have the white mana, unfortunately, so we're just going to start with an attack here with our Goblin Guide. And that is going to reveal a Flooded Strand, so that's going to go straight to our opponent's hand. I think we want to go ahead and suspend the Rift Bolt here and just pass the turn. So we'll see if our opponent can stem the bleeding here. We are kind of running out of gas a little bit. The Lightning Helix was quite good for our opponent, but we do have this Boral's Charm in hand. Now our opponent's tapping out for a Geist of Sainttraft. So we got a couple of options here. We can definitely just go ahead and fire off this Lightning Bolt. So let's go ahead and do that, dropping our opponent down to 6. And now this Rift Bolt is going to drop our opponent all the way down to 3. So if we just draw a white source or a variety of burn spells, our opponent is just dead. Unfortunately, we drew a Copperline Gorge. So just going to go ahead and attack here. And a Snapcaster is going to be revealed here. And okay. So this is the unfortunate spot where we needed to... basically over half of our deck, I believe, would have won us the game on that turn. We did not draw what we needed, so we're forced to pass back. Our opponent's going to be able to untap now. They have Cryptic Command at the ready, and the draw step was actually a Rift Bolt. Not the greatest of draws, so got a couple of options here. If we attempt to cast the Rift Bolt, though, our opponent can just go for the Cryptic Command. I think we just want to pass here, though it may mean that our opponent is going to Snapcaster Mage back the Lightning Helix, and then attempt to Lightning Helix us. But that isn't what our opponent's doing, so it's kind of this waiting game at this stage. And there is an Eidolon of the Great Revel. So that's a pretty interesting draw. We definitely can go ahead now and suspend Riftbolt and just pass the turn. And so we'll see if our opponent is going to react to this or not. So it is going to be the Snapcaster Mage now, kind of this delayed Snapcaster Mage, going for targeting the Lightning Helix. So that is going to bring the life totals back somewhat more in our opponent's favor. We do have a Riftbolt coming off suspend. We are just going to want to go to our opponent's face with that, rather than try to get rid of this Snapcaster Mage. So we'll see if our opponent goes for the Cryptic Command, which we know about, or perhaps lets this resolve, or plays some other sort of counterspell. The most likely play is the Cryptic Command that we know about, but our opponent could have other ideas depending on what their hand looks like. So yep, there's the Cryptic Command. And our draw for the turn was a Lightning Bolt. So we're just going to go ahead and Lightning Bolt our opponent right now. And then hopefully our opponent does not have a Spell Snare in hand. So we're going to attempt to land this Eidolon of the Great Revel. And if our opponent has a Spell Snare, that's basically the worst case scenario here. If not, this enters play, and then a lot of our opponent's cards are all of a sudden shut off. But it looks like our opponent is not going to do anything. Nahiri, actually, one of the interesting interactions about Nahiri is that it can actually get rid of Eidolon of the Great Revel. So that's definitely something to be aware of. Hopefully that's not going to come up right here. And so, yep, our opponent's just passing the turn. We drew Searing Blaze, which is a little bit of an awkward draw, but we don't actually have to cast anything. There's really no reason to do anything here. We're just going to wait for our opponent to act first. They could easily have another Cryptic Command in hand, something like that. So, yeah, we're just not going to block this Snapcaster Mage. There's no real reason to try to get in that fight. So now we can actually go ahead and try to move towards attacking. And I like this because our opponent doesn't have a lot of great options in this spot besides activating the Celestial Colonnade. If they do, though, we're just going to go ahead and go for the win with our Searing Blaze. So, yep, now that the Celestial Colonnade is activated, we can go ahead. Our opponent's conveniently at 1, so we're just going to go ahead and try to get this last point across, basically. And anything that our opponent could have is basically going to trigger the Eidolon of the Great Revel. So I would expect this is just going to be the game. So yeah, our opponent's just going to concede here. And we're going to go on to game 2. This is normally actually a pretty tough matchup for Burn. We were able to get that one, though. So, considering our sideboard options, the Searing Blazes, they're nice to be able to get rid of Snapcaster, but sometimes they're a little bit hard to set up. So, I'm in favor of cutting some amount of them. I like the Molten Rains, just to be able to offset what our opponent's up to, get rid of something like a Celestial Colonnade, and then the Skullcrack, we can board that in. It's got, sometimes this type of deck will board in a card like a Kitchen Finks, and we already know about Lightning Helix, so stopping life gain is pretty important. And yeah, we're just going to go ahead with this configuration. And we saw that game how our opponent had the Lightning Helix, had a bunch of cards in hand. Presumably some of them were spells, but it was just hard because we had such a fast start. Our opponent didn't really have enough time to stabilize. But we are on the draw this game, so that's definitely something to keep in mind. But having a 1-drop creature is always how you want to start off. Personally, I prefer to have a Swiftspear, but I will take a Goblin Guide any day when Swiftspear is not available. So we see the Colonnade into Steam Vents. This could be, this could mean a Path to Exile. Unfortunately, we're not really equipped to play around Path to Exile with this hand. So we're just going to go ahead and start with an attack. And I think we want to just go ahead and try to fire off this Atarka's command. It may not work out, but it's worth going for. So we're going to attempt to pump our Monastery Swiftspear, and it looks like, yep, okay, there is the Path to Exile. But our opponent's still going to take 3 damage. And we've got a pretty burn-heavy hand. So hopefully we are able to resolve this Molten Rain. Although this Geist of St. Traft, it definitely could pose a problem. So we just have to think, how are we going to navigate winning through the Geist of St. Traft? But I think we still want to just go ahead and cast the Molten Rain on this Celestial Colonnade. And we want to go ahead and fetch for a Sacred Foundry with our Arid Mesa. So on this attack, the Geist threatens to bring us down to 10. So it's basically just going to be a race. We're going down to 10 on the attack, and then we're going down to 9 on the fetch. So basically a Lightning Bolt or Lightning Helix will be able to finish us off here, which is pretty unfortunate. But Geist is a pretty hard card to deal with. We don't have a lot of ways of interacting with it besides having a creature on board or just having a faster start than our opponent. So hopefully this isn't going to be a Lightning Helix. It is, and so we actually can't do anything about this. We can Skullcrack our opponent and stop this gain 3, but the Geist is going to come in, and this Lightning Helix is going to bring us down to 6. So we're just going to go ahead and go to game 3 here. So, looking at our options here, Geist-Sustained Craft is just a card we don't want to see our opponent play on turn 3. It's not clear that we should be doing anything differently per se as far as sideboard plan. I think this configuration is still pretty solid. So let's go ahead and try it again for game 3. We are on the play. So that game, had we been on the play, things very easily could have turned out differently. But this is a 1-land hand, which is a bit rough. I think we do want to keep it, though, on the back of just having multiple 1-mana plays. So we're going to have a choice, and this is a pretty typical choice with this deck, between Goblin Guide and Monastery Swiftspear. The Goblin Guide, though, is just going to get in for more damage faster. So I like playing it first, even though our opponent can gain some card advantage because of us playing it first, and we see a Celestial Colonnade was drawn here. So we'll see what our opponent elects to discard. And it's going to be a Flooded Strand, so that indicates a pretty mana-heavy draw. So we have Eidolon in hand, which we could deploy here. And that may be what we want to do, but we also have to consider the potential of just playing Swiftspear and playing Lava Spike on this turn as well. Both options are pretty solid. However, I think we do want to go ahead and just get this Eidolon of the Great Revel into play. Our opponent may end up getting rid of it, but they're still going to take 2 damage in order to get rid of it. And it could be a Path to Exile, something like that could give us another land. We just want to be playing a 2-mana spell on this turn. And so we're going to see our opponent, it looks like, pass the turn. So now we can just go ahead and play our Monastery Swiftspear if we want to. And I think that's the right course to take. So we are going to deal ourselves a bit of additional damage this way, but it feels worth it. And we're not too concerned about our life total, just because our opponent's going to be in much worse shape a lot faster. So our opponent could have a Snapcaster Mage to flash in to block the Eidolon. But either way, I think it is right to just crack with everything here. This could be a Path to Exile, it could be a Snapcaster Mage. Unclear which one our opponent's going to play. It's pretty likely our opponent has some way to get rid of the Eidolon, and so it looks like the play is Snapcaster Mage. Which is fine. Our opponent's still down to 7. We have a good amount of burn in hand. We know about a Lightning Bolt that our opponent just drew, but our opponent's first going to need to be able to get rid of these creatures that are on the battlefield on our side. And that is going to require multiple removal spells, not just one. And even then, if we draw land, we can set our opponent back pretty far with this Molten Rain. Our opponent is not necessarily going to be able to hold up counter magic if using removal spells on our creatures. Sulfur Falls, though, is a good land to have for our opponent because it doesn't cause any damage, unlike, for instance, a fetch land would. So, we did draw another land here. So I think we do want to go ahead and fetch here and attempt to cast this Molten Rain. And we'll see what our opponent wants to do about this. If it resolves, that's great. It isn't going to resolve, but that's still fine because we're still dealing our opponent 4 damage this turn either way. So we see a Dispel being revealed, but since our opponent had to use the negate on the Molten Rain, it meant they could not have the mana available to cast the Lightning Bolt, which we already know about. So now this Skullcrack in our hand is actually lethal. So we know about a Dispel, which we may or may not want to play around, but in any case we just have lethal. So we're not going to slow roll. We're just going to go ahead and cast our spells. Our opponent's going to Dispel this, and then we're just going to Lightning Bolt and finish the job. So that should wrap up the match.